This is a session on the future of finance for nature. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm David Myers. I'm the Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Alliance. And we have an amazing panel today. We have Bob Tansey from the TNC, who's going to start us off with a little description of what he does. And everyone's going to go on and describe who they are, what they do, and then we'll do some questions. I'll ask some questions, the audience will ask some questions, and we will figure out what the future of the finance for nature is. So, Bob, over to you.
I'm the Nature Conservancy's global policy lead for degraded lands and restoration. And I mostly work to advance regenerative. The Nature Conservancy. Hi, Bob Tansey. I'm with the Nature Conservancy. I'm our global policy lead for degraded lands and restoration. I spend most of my time in the policy arena working to advance concept and practice of regenerative foodscapes. The Nature Conservancy, together with the Paulson Institute and Cornell University, did a major report on financing nature. We've been involved in innovative finance for conservation, you might say, for the whole 70 years of the existence of the Nature Conservancy, and we continue to build on that. We've partnered on incorporating nature-based solutions in the design of water security projects and a related guidance document for development finance institutions and governments. And we're actively working with development finance institutions on incorporating investment and conservation metrics across the renewable energy, water, ecotourism, and forestry sectors, and are also in conversations with the key players to co-create investment opportunities so that biodiversity and climate outcomes are designed to be part of the solution from the very beginning and not just a nice to have. This is a global spatial analysis of foodscapes driven largely by biophysical characteristics. Within the process around the UN Food System Summit, we have presented foodscapes as an integrative framework for bringing together all the stakeholders and the best management practices, depending on the conditions and also in view of the state of foodscapes around the world. We have designed, based on science and based on experimentation, a number of nature-based solutions for foodscapes, but the solutions can vary depending on where you are and the nature of the foodscape. We favor regenerative approaches that reinvest in soil organic matter, and that provides multiple benefits as it's achieved. In the report I mentioned earlier, we've highlighted that hundreds of billions of dollars go into agriculture, but not necessarily in ways that best serve people and planet. And so we are looking together with partners and thinking ahead to engaging at national policy levels to how do you shift those policy and financing frameworks including so that the innovative finance can work better. These are just some kinds of financing mechanisms which could be particularly applicable to agriculture. But again, I think we might say we're at an early stage or a new stage. If you want to shift in the way that people have spoken to, not just at the Food Systems Summit, but in the Biodiversity Convention talks, playing into the climate COP that's coming up, looking ahead next year to the land degradation neutrality objectives of the UNCCD, we're looking for real transformation, and that's going to require some new thinking, including on the financial innovations. So I would suggest as we go into this discussion, but as we go forward from this discussion, that we think in terms of orders of magnitude. I have colleagues who really specialize in innovative finance for agriculture, and they have one package where they're looking to put together $30 billion from different participants to advance the sustainable production of beef and soy in several biodiversity-rich areas of South America. And what we have found at the Nature Conservancy, what our Nature Vest colleagues who are specialists in all this have found, is that we're always learning. You always have to be learning what it is that is investable and is appealing to more people. And we have to make sure, particularly if we're going to have transformative change in terms of agriculture that works better for people and planet, that you bring in all the stakeholders. We believe this is one of the advantages of the Foodscapes approach. And we've actually, at the Nature Conservancy, done a separate report on conservation financing for programs with indigenous peoples and local communities. So in that instance, you find you might need to have some component of investment of upfront institutional capacity, and you might provide some support to those leaders as they engage with their people to cultivate the support for these solutions. And if you look at Africa, you may be looking at energy together with agriculture when you talk about finance. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Really great start, because you know, food systems are so central to some of our challenges with nature and some of the greatest opportunities for return-based financing. So great opportunities. Next, I'd like to go to Christian Wustman, who's division chief and sector of the sector policy unit, infrastructure, water, and natural resources at KfW, the Development Bank. And so, Christian, over to you.
Yeah, good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. KfW is a German development bank. We have been active in biodiversity financing for more than 30 years. And KfW at the moment holds a portfolio in biodiversity finance of roughly 3 billion euros. And we are active in about 600 protected areas worldwide. So I think from the bilateral donors, we have a huge experience in that area. Well, the topic here is the future of finance. And when we think about the future, I think we expect lots of fancy new financing instruments that come up. And I would like to start the other way around. I think that for biodiversity financing, for really protected area financing, in the future, there will still be needed huge amounts of grant finance. Because, I mean, you know better than I that most of the activities in the protected areas are not commercially viable. They do not bring any substantial return on investment. And many of these areas are global public goods, which provide a very good reason for countries to subsidize really these areas. So that would be my first point. I think we need substantial amount of grant financing and to see how we increase grant financing for the areas in the future. One way of increasing the grant finance for us has been, well, inclusion of human rights, of involvement of the surrounding areas of the national parks has become stronger and will need more financing as well. So I think that in general, if we include all these aspects even stronger than we have done so far, the costs for protecting nature will even be higher than we have calculated up to now. Well, so that's about grant financing. How can we bring innovative instruments to grant financing? One area, and that I think TFA knows very well and KfW has lots of experience in, is conservation trust funds. KfW supports about 15 conservation trust funds worldwide, and they have proven a very good tool for long-term investment in protected areas. And I think the challenge is to improve and to further develop these trust funds. From KfW side, we recently launched with the German government the Legacy Landscapes Fund, which is an innovative instrument that teams up with private philanthropists. So we have several American philanthropic foundations on board that bring in substantial philanthropic financing to protected areas. And the idea of this Legacy Landscapes Fund is not to deliver usual project finance, which goes for 5 years or maybe 10 years, but it starts with 15 years, and the aim is to provide financing in eternity to selected, mostly important heritage sites worldwide. The objective is to finance 30 sites until 2030 with a financing volume of €1 billion. We have 150 million US dollar in financing available so far. So the rest is about, we expect to come in the future years. So there's a substantial start, and we expect much more to come. And Legacy Landscapes Fund will be available to protected areas on a competitive basis. So there will be competitive biddings and calls for proposals for protected areas in cooperation with NGOs to provide projects. So that's one way of, one vision of ours for the future of finance of biodiversity. Another area is the area of structured investment. Maybe you are familiar with the kind of financing structures where there's public grant money in a fund, and this public grant money serves kind of a shield for private sector money that can come in with much lower risk. So this structured finance allows to bring in private money that usually would be too shy, would shy off the risks for biodiversity investment. So at KfW, we have the Eco Business Fund working, which is a structure that at the moment runs since 2014 and has provided almost 2 billion euros in loans to small and medium enterprises for agricultural, ecotourism, and protected area financing. No, not protected area financing, in the forestry, agricultural, and ecotourism sector. That's financing that goes from the fund to financing institutions and then to micro and small enterprises that provide environmental benefits. And as you can see, 1.2 billion in 5 years is big numbers in what we are used to in the conservation area, and that's possible through private sector involvement and through financial institutions. So that's what's up and running already now. When we look for the future and when we are discussing with our colleagues, what we are looking at is as well the issue of green bonds. And KfW is not only German development bank, but works for the German government in promotion of the German economy, and is, I think, one of the biggest issuers of green bonds worldwide. And now I have to say, yes, but so far not for biodiversity. Colleagues have been working on green financing, especially for climate topics, and they are quite successful in that. They have put out really billions of green bonds for that. Biodiversity would be the next frontier. And I can tell you that in our refinancing department, there is an interest to look into it. But at the same time, the financing people say, could be complicated, as there are not so many returns to be expected. And it's more complicated to really find projects that you can underlie your green bonds with. But definitely, I think that's an issue that will come in future years. And I think what people tell me as well is there's huge interest in the market. Many people would like to buy this kind of bonds. The shortage is more on the project side. And so that's a topic that's not yet resolved, but I think will be part of the future of financing. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Some amazing work that KfW is doing, and it's great that you're looking for these future opportunities and innovations. So you talked about blended finance, and it's nice to have Pierre Rousseau from BNP Paribas, who's passionate about nature conservation and comes from a private sector bank. So Pierre, let's hear your ideas.
Yeah, thanks, David. So hi, everybody. So my name is Pierre Rousseau, and I'm an advisor for BNP Paribas for sustainable business, and trying to build a new solution. And the first things I want to mention is the word solution. Banks normally create products, and I think here we will have to talk about solution. And solution means one thing: to listen first, not to push a product, but to listen about the problem. And here about biodiversity, we talk first about the problem. So we need to listen about what we want to achieve. So we have to listen to our clients. So that everything's coming first as a bank, as a clients. We have people, corporates, we have private clients, we have investors. So we want to interfere between them. So the first things that it's important to talk about is that we realize that there will be no products to solve that problem. So that means bringing solution. Solution means collaboration. So that means we have to start to collaborate. Then after that, we realize that those solutions has to be innovative. We cannot take what we have existing. We have to create something new. And the innovation will come by putting together different sources of funding. So we talk about the grants. We talk about the work done by the scientists. We talk about, so we need to collect all that and to integrate that. As a banker, we're not scientists, so we need to work with people who can bring this knowledge. We need to bring the people who understand. So people like TNC, for instance, who make study, we can leverage that. So the first thing is to work and to understand and to leverage what we can leverage from science. Then after that, at the beginning, we have a lot of projects which are greenfield, completely new. So how can we finance greenfield? If you go to see a conventional investor, he will never jump. So we will go to see the grants, the people who do grants, the foundation. Foundation, 1.5 trillion of US dollar existing in the world today, which is used for grants, but can be used also to do concessional loans. So that means the people lend the money instead to give the money, and in exchange of an achievement of a performance or a project. So today we are structuring concessional loans by foundation in order to start and to generate a greenfield project that nobody believes on, but that we all want to do, which is backed up by science. And then we will collateralize that maybe with the carbon credit. Another good things about carbon credit, which was mentioned on the first slides, which is financing. We can get the monetization of the externalities. By creating more carbon capture, you can monetize it, you can give a value to it. By creating tomorrow more biodiversity, we can create a credit about that. So we can incentivize the people to regenerate more. So by doing this, we will create the first level of financing. Then after that, we will immediately refinance that by the people who will take over the project and probably create some value around the project, economical value. If we are renovating a lake, where there is no more fish. And we recreate the lake by creating an infrastructure around it, which is financed by the first description I made about the concessional loans. Then after that, we can create a company who will run the fishermen, because we can fish again. And by putting the fish again, we recreate nature. We recreate all the infrastructure around the nature, making alive. Then you generate revenues, and revenues can finance the conservation of the nature that you have put in place. And then after that, we can refinance by a bank. So slowly you create a chain of different sources of funding in order to bring the project, and you create, in addition of the resilience ecology, the social resilience, you create also an economical and a financial resilience. All the projects that we are working on has been initiated by non-profit organizations. So all of them. So they come to us, and after we create that structure that can progress and put the project at scale. And then our job is to find investor at the end who will invest in those projects, because they will see an interest and a return on the long term. So this is the new way to work. So for that, you need what? Collaboration, partnership. The most difficult thing is to create those partnerships, because we need to align everybody about the long-term project. This is what we have started to do already with the Global Fund of Coral Reef, which is. Second thing we need innovative solution, not product, solution. So we need to bring that all together to work transversally in through finance between the different instruments of finance, the DFI, the foundation, the different group has to be put together. Then third, we need data, big data, because we need to measure impact. We need to measure impact. We don't need to do the ESG. ESG is to be normal. What we have to do is to do impact measurement, because in addition of the risk return, we need to measure the impact that we do generate, because we do demonstrate we capture carbon. We do need to demonstrate that we increase the regeneration of biodiversity. And for that, the only way to do it is with data measurement. And to be honest, the data exists today on a scientific way. We need to translate those data today into business. So there is a big work to be done there. Then next step, risk management is becoming more and more important. You can imagine we have a lot of opportunity of new business here that can be created out of nature, but we have also to make sure that we measure the risk. Why we need to measure the risk? Because we are in transition. So we don't come from nowhere. We come from an existing world that we have to move to another world. So that means we have to live with the past. So it's more difficult to renovate a whole house than to build a new house. It's the same thing here. So we need to do this transition and financing it. So measuring risk and assessing the new opportunities has to be done at the same time. Not only risk, if you manage only the risk, what you will have to do, you will decrease activities, but you have to recreate new activities which are integrating the proper measurement of environmental and social. Other things which is key, trust and transparency. If you want to have a proper allocation of capital to the right capital in the right measurement, you need to have trust and transparency. So trust and transparency is also something which is very important. Now I would like to make an additional point which is clear. In banks, we have two ways to integrate biodiversity. First, to push our client to integrate biodiversity in their business model. So this is coming from the economical side and going to the, I will say, environmental side and biodiversity, climate change, biodiversity loss. And so this is business as usual, I will say. So we integrate more. So that's the easiest part. But there is another one which is more disruptive, is from nature to create new business. I give you an example. I'm working with a marine engineering company. Marine engineering company, there is a project today where they need to protect coast. And what they used to do, they used to do kilometers of concrete. Today, they work on a solution where they will plant mangrove. And why the mangrove will be much better? because first they realize that it's more resistant than on the long term than the concrete, because the concrete will probably fall apart after a certain time. Nature is always stronger than what the human beings are doing. But the second thing, the mangrove will capture a lot of carbon. And by monetizing this, they can monetize the carbon. So finally, for the company, it's better to create a mangrove wall than to create a concrete wall. So it's a better business for them. So they create a unit in the division to develop nature-based solution program. So this is a complete change of strategy of the corporate. So we need also, with the help of the philanthropy, with the help of the nonprofit, bring this way to think about corporates changing their business model in order to leverage the use of nature. I have another example with bamboo, for instance, into the forest, etc. So coral reef, this is what we try to achieve by also at a lower level, because probably it's not as easy, but is to develop small activities around the coral reef to make sure that the people can survive and then protect by themselves, because they see the value to protect the coral reef, because by protecting it, they protect their own fishing. And consequently, so we need to bring that to the culture. So awareness of that is this. So that's the way we have to go. And this is where we see the future, is by this collaborative financing process. This collaborative financing process, when we will use different type of fund at a different level. That's right here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So many issues, so many ideas here to get to, and I have questions and some thoughts. But I'm going to pass to a colleague, Almudena, who's going to ask the first question, and then I'm going to maybe ask a question for me before passing to the rest of the audience.
Yes, thank you so much, David. So my name is Almudena Kralashevich. I come from IUCN. And I did want to ask, actually, I have two questions for our panelists. First question is related to the actual, SIPC just recently published a report that is actually looking into the trends for finance for nature. Where actually it's done based on a survey within the industry that showcases a trend towards increase in finance in terms of so a lot more especially corporates are coming into the game, pledging and being ready to invest billions of dollars basically into these nature-based solutions and funding for nature, and so we're still lacking the supply of projects. So in terms of the market is still pretty small, and it's quite undeveloped. So my question for you is, what do you think, based on your experience, what can we do as a community? And Pierre, you mentioned also partnerships. So what can we do as a partnership and as a community to help to transition and accelerate this progress? And the second question would be also on the role of, so we talk about data, like we're going to need much more data because we need to showcase the impact, we need to measure the impact. Data also means money in terms of it creates an additional burden, additional cost. Again, based on your sort of vision or based on your experience, how do you see the role of technology in order to help to reduce the cost of such data and actually help us to have credible impact that is going to be visible to others as well? So I'll stop there. Thank you.
So maybe I will take the project and the source of project. First of all, one thing happened this year, which is fundamental, is the commitment of net carbon 2050 by a lot of players, including corporates. Why? Because by doing this, they have now to solve the problem of the supply chain. So now a company is responsible of the supply chain. And if you are a fashion company, you have now to make sure that your supply chain of cotton coming from Morocco or coming from India is neutral carbon, zero. So if you do that, it means that you need to find a solution. You need to find a project to make this happening. They will not be able to finance that from the balance sheet. It's a supplier, but those product writers are also providing the competition. So you have two solutions here. Either the sector go together and find a solution to do it and finance and integrate it. And so they need to create a project that will be viable together. Or we need to find a solution, like I mentioned before, by creating a solution from scratch with somebody who got the solution that need to be financed by concessional loans, refinancing by banks, etc. So they will create a new project bankable. So by doing this, you will see a lot of new projects coming from the supply chain that will require retransformation, refinancing, and consequently, we will take into account environmental but also social parameters into the project. So there will be a lot of sourcing coming that. The only problem today to solve that, banks, asset managers, or the existing finance need to transform themselves. And we need also the regulator to change his life, the central bank, because banks are regulated. So we need the central bank to revisit and to reallow, maybe to create special platform for that. That's why I recommend. But we need to recreate a new environment, because it's touching your second point, which is the transaction cost. The transaction cost need to be viable. So if you are accumulated all today, all the costs between the public and the private sector, it will be very expensive. So this is the first source. The second source, like we do on the Coral, like we do in the Coral Fund, what we are doing, we are creating incubator. So we are using grant money, because we need always grant money from the country, from Germany is part of it, by the way, from the country or from the philanthropists to incubate new projects, which has been selected by David, for instance. And then we make sure that those projects are becoming investable. And when they are investable, we move them in the investment window. So we create this, we call it technical assistance. So we need to create much more technical assistance, but instead to be isolated in a separated, isolated on a separated unit, they are linked to an investment vehicle. And so this will create more additional, so that's for answering your question. So I think maybe-
Thanks, Pierre. Bob's on the edge of his seat here, is dying to get.
I'm excited.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'd like to talk about this need for projects. So I would say start with a really big view. So what are some of the biggest challenges that the world has that cut across climate, biodiversity, lands? So one of those I started out with is agriculture. So think about if you're a business and if this foodscapes idea gains traction as a place where you can address all of those three big challenges and you can fulfill your commitments on sustainability, create replicable models of what's investable across different kinds of foodscapes all around the world, and then make your adjustments. Number two, the world is shifting from coal to renewables. Where is that new energy infrastructure going? It's going everywhere. And as it goes everywhere, it's destroying biodiversity, it's degrading lands, and it can even cause unintended consequences in terms of the climate equation, both mitigation and adaptation. So create a business model where you are part of the development by design for where you site all of that renewable energy that's needed, not only to replace coal, but at the end of the century to be providing energy for 4 billion people in Africa.
Yeah, let me add to your question about data and monitoring. I think there's really exciting developments in this area through technology. Remote monitoring and verification tools are really becoming practical. In the bank, we are using them and we are continuing to develop them. For example, to measure the extent of deforestation or afforestation through satellite data. And these tools are much less expensive than sending missions of experts to do visits on the ground. So I think that not everything will be, I mean, there are limits to remote monitoring and verification, but for certain areas, and I think especially in afforestation and forests, they can be very cost effective and very accurate. So I think that's a positive technological development that we are seeing. And that's really becoming to a point of being usable That's not high science text, but it can really be applied.
Yeah, I just want to add something. And Matt McLucky was telling me last night that there are these soil sensors in Argentina that are placed in soy plantations that are transmitting data to Bloomberg, to the Bloomberg terminals, because the soy buyers want to know ahead of time when there's going to be drought issues. And he's saying that also has been shown to affect the price of bonds, sovereign bonds. So, I mean, we're getting there. We have to figure out what those indicators are for each of the different sectors and get them, usable to the investors. Okay, a couple of things here. You mentioned carbon, Pierre, right? And trying to monetize ecosystem services. That's hard. When we're trying to finance nature, we're going to want to leave areas and conserve them and protect them, whatever. You can't extract so much, right? So that we're limited with the kind of sources of revenue that we can use to help finance conservation, carbon being one of them, water is another one, agriculture, right? 70% of the world's water resources are being used by agriculture, but we don't charge enough for that, right? We're not, and even carbon is, mostly voluntary at this point, right? There's no unified global approach for it. So how can we transform these ecosystem services into revenue streams to create the drive and the demand for more private sector investment there? That's an easy question for you all.
You want? Yeah, that's the question. First of all, again, it's a common work. The first things we need to set up the rules. We need to set up the rules of engagement. This is still what we're missing. We need to avoid two things: the duplication. So avoid bubbling system like has been in the past in many different industry. And we need also to avoid, greenwashing. So greenwashing is easy. So it's easy to recreate a new world when the people can benefit from that world. And so the first things that we need a strong set of rules. And I think we do hope all that COP26 will be the day that they will finally set up those rules, because we're still missing, as you say, the rules. The second thing is that we need a strict control of the issuance of credit carbon. We cannot have duplication. As soon as you have a leaking of duplication, that means we cannot generate more carbon than we have. So we need to make sure that we have a strict system. Then after that, we need to create a system, a double system. You generate additional carbon capture, you have a benefit. You increase on the other side, you pay for it. Same thing for water, same thing for things. You use water, you destroy water, you should pay for it. Today, we are still too laxist with a lot of industry about this. And some business will disappear straight away today because they have to pay the real damage that they constitute. Because if we monetize the externalities, if you destroy it, you have to pay it. And not only remunerating when you generate the other side. Then you will create a real incentive for the people to change the business. The problem after that, you have to put that in the accounting. And the problem is that accounting is always the last piece that we solve. Where here, we need to put accounting as the first things we need to solve, because if you change the accounting of the company today and you integrate the externalities inside, it means that the business they will report will be different. And that's probably where we have to make a more push. And accountants, which are always in the shadow, need maybe to be put in the light.
Thanks. Bob,
Thanks a lot. Couple of examples. So one is water funds. Anybody ever eat pizza in New York City? Do you know why it's so good? Because the water. New York City started investing way upstream in New York and New Jersey so that cleaner water made its way to the city, and the city has been able to avoid billions of dollars in hard plant infrastructure because the water that's coming into the city is a lot cleaner. So the Nature Conservancy has pioneered the idea and application of water funds around the world. And, you do change the accounting, you change the equation, but everybody's happy because it's working. Another arena, so I've lived 13 years in China. China has a great national engineering project called Sponge Cities. So the idea is you hold the stormwater where it falls. Well, in Washington, D.C., where I lived, the Nature Conservancy helped create a market. So first you put the responsibility on the developer to hold the water. Developer can't hold the water. Well, then they pay for some bioswales on a cemetery or a parking lot or like that. And you may have some increase in the water bill, but you've looked at all those externalities, you've looked at the big picture, and you've come up with a solution. So you can come up with markets and mechanisms that allow these things to spread widely and work for the long term.
And maybe a last thing to add, from the perspective of regulation, the EU taxonomy that you may be aware of, that European Union, and I think they're really serious about it, they're setting up a taxonomy. They started with climate, but there will be a taxonomy for water, and there will be a taxonomy for biodiversity as well. And I think this will be really a clear set of rules that firstly will apply to Europe, but I think it has the chance of setting standards worldwide as well. And that's, I think it will be really important for the whole financing industry.
And the task force on nature-related financial disclosures also could standardize some of this. So I'm going to open it up to questions from the floor. So a quick hand back there. Hold on one second.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I was not here at the beginning. Sorry. I'm a small business consultant in French Guiana, and maybe you addressed this point already, but I wanted to know how does this topic relate, for instance, with the informal to formal economy, and how does this relate also with like SMEs, with small business? How can we also diversify the world of finance, for instance, because we're talking about diversity of biology, so maybe there's other points for diversity as well. Thank you.
Okay. Chris.
Well, with respect to SMEs, I think there are credit lines in the world that address, that's specifically directed as SMEs, and to the other audience that was here, I already mentioned a huge fund of German corporation, the Eco Business Fund, that provides 400 million euro at the moment of active portfolio, over the years 2 billion euros for SMEs that work in agriculture, forestry, or ecotourism. So there are credit lines available, and that's one example, and I'm sure there are others around as well.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, the pipeline is such an important one.
Hi, I'm Linda Kruger with the Nature Conservancy. I'm a colleague of Bob, so I'll direct my question principally to Pierre and Christian. But one of the sort of, so Nature Conservancy, of course, is very excited about nature-based infrastructure, nature-based solutions, but I'd like to sort of focus on the flip side, which we haven't talked so much about, the mitigation part, into more conventional development projects, and using that as a driver to finance nature, to finance restoration. And we see one of the principal stumbling blocks is really the lack of state buy-in to an integrated land use strategy and the advanced planning to really identify where those restoration opportunities are, where those investments should be made as compensation requirements, which are often on the books, but we see very rarely implemented. And I was hoping you might address the role of development finance institutions in helping countries develop those spatial plans that would help create markets around restoration in nature. Thank you.
Christian, maybe you want to try?
Can give it a try. I mean, in general, public development banks, and often they are combined with technical assistance or with funds for studies. So in general, this kind of activities is available if a government decides to ask the development agency for support in this area. So I think in general, it's a possibility I'm not aware of, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist. No, I'm not aware of an example now, but in theory, it's possible. And if a country addresses us or GIZ or other technical assistance institutions, I think it's a topic that's interesting for them. And there is grant money out there to do this.
So maybe I have two answers to that. First of all, the private sector banks work you never work very closely first with the big DFI. So the only connection was to issue their bonds most of the time. So now we have changed the way that we work with them by working more together on projects and co-financing projects, especially to have different type of source of funding like the blended finance we explained before. So it means that we will bring more projects coming from the private sector that normally have a public effect or a public impact. And then by doing this channeling, there will be more projects coming into the play where even the state didn't start to do things, or the country didn't start. It's more, and I will not use country, I will use territory, because more and more it's at the level of the territory that you will have impact and action, more than probably at the country level. I'll give you an example. We just work on a project in the north of France where we do regenerating farming, where we start by putting together the territory, the French region, and then we put the off-takers, the cooperative, the farmers, and it's by creating such kind of project that finally there will be an impact of re-increasing the biodiversity, the soil, and even the biodiversity, because we are replanting what you call trees in the middle of the land where normally they were cut like 50 years ago. So this is the type of, I think a lot of things will come now by the private sector, and this will be channeled by the cooperation that will be created by the triangle philanthropist, DFI, private banks, and private investors, of course.
Great. I just wanted to comment, Pierre, on what you were talking about, the two sides of the coin, you know, where you try to monetize the positive externalities of environment, but also charge for the negative externalities. And, you know, that, of course, that requires government regulation and requires, you know, enforcement, things like that. But are any of you seeing that kind of mindset institutionalized in any countries where they're really thinking, absolutely have to internalize all these externalities. We have to bring these issues into the market, because otherwise public funding is not going to necessarily be enough to cover it all. So why don't we charge companies more for their impacts? Why don't we incentivize good practices more with financial, you know, where are some examples? Where could this go?
I don't have any country in mind, but what I do see is more and more sectors will start to organize themselves. I will give two examples. And they try to avoid the tax because they don't want to do it. But for me, it's prevention. Prevention is not bad. So I will give two examples. Shipping. The Association of Owners of Shipping are really, for instance, realizing that if they don't change the propulsion of the ship, they will definitely be out of business. So those guys, which are very small group, because there are not so many in the world, they have accelerated the process of transformation of the ships, and they try to find new way of financing, and they contact us as a financier in order to accelerate the process. Why? Because they don't want to be penalized in the future. So they try to see that. You will see in agriculture, you have the group One Planet to Biodiversity, which is starting to regroup all the people, even the competing, in order to try to set up the rules in regenerating farming, because they want to anticipate to be penalized one day by the country, the regulators, etc. So you will see some action coming like that, where the people do realize that if they don't do anything, they will be penalized. So they want to avoid this penalty. So they will start to. Sometimes it's better to anticipate what the regulator will do. Okay, and that's I see more and more examples like that. Yeah.
I think it's difficult for a country as a whole to completely neutralize negative external effects. because there are always people that benefit from that. And we have talked in other sessions about harmful subsidies, harmful to nature, even aggravating external effects. But I think that's a reality, and that's a policy and politics issue. A country that I've come across that I think is quite green is Costa Rica. I think they are, it was concerning public transport, for example, the conservation of nature. I think they have quite a strong mindset of protecting nature and of internalizing negative external effects.
Well, that I totally agree. Costa Rica consciously decided to base its society on payment for ecosystem services. Another example, if one of our colleagues, Joe Kissiker here, he helped the government of Mongolia map the whole country. And then the government made conscious decisions about which areas were going to be preserved as protected natural areas as a response to increase in mining investments and activities. So then we could look ahead, how might governments think about the way agriculture should go and grow in the future. So instead of taking enormous amounts of money and giving it to people to either grow something that's in oversupply or not grow something in order to influence the price, what if you said, what kind of farming in a given area is going to do the best for nature and for all the people involved, including food and nutrition for people who don't have it, and then rethink the public financing there, which is huge, so that you incentivize the transition to the kind of practices that we're hearing about from Pierre. And I'm sure there would be all kinds of development agencies and private flows that would follow.
Great.
May I add one thing? And even banks like us, we ban tobacco, for instance. So because it's something that we could decide to take away without transition. And for other things like coal, we do a transition plan. So we have put already a transition plan to get out, because it's easy to say you have to get out. So we stopped to finance. We do not finance anymore. But then we decided to get out with a different timing, because then we need to help the client to do this transition. So it's not a question just to get out suddenly like that. We need to leave the transition, but then banks can start to take more action like that. And there will be more action like that, I do believe. Yeah.
Great. I think we'll have time for one more question. Then I'm going to ask you all to maybe just give a few thoughts to wrap up. So any more questions from the audience here? Yes.
Hello, my name is Marie-Noël Tournou. I'm in the culture heritage sector, and I'm very much interested to listen to finance. And there's been a lot of work with IUCN and ICOMOS and UNESCO on the relationship between nature and culture. And looking at agriculture, for example, there are programs in the FAO on the GIAS, or what we would call cultural landscapes in our area, where we would be considering both aspects. So it's not only agriculture, and what you were talking about mapping is looking at the smaller scale and how you look at a system for its qualities and then want and wish to invest and support it as much as possible. So for the culture people, these things are linked, and there can't be an opposition with just keeping biodiversity. So it's really a sort of land approach, site-based at different scales. And it's an unorthodox way of looking also at the economy, and also in the terms of calculating offsets or monetarizing, which for us is also a very dangerous way of looking at things, depending on what your criteria, the way you do this evaluation. And this is probably an area where there should be more research in making it very detailed and specific for people, the socioeconomic, the values, beliefs, and that's especially true for indigenous people in areas which are totally different. So there's this orthodox and unorthodox way of looking at the evaluation monetarization, which can be hyper dangerous with a perverse side effect. If you have any comments on this.
I can only agree with what you say, because that's why I talk about territoriality. So you can have large principle, but after that you have to reset your principle when you are going on a specific territoriality. And even in terms of pure environmental, not even touching the cultural aspect, but what in biodiversity works maybe in area will not work on the other side. So it has to be revisited. And the involvement of the local communities is definitely quite important. We don't have to do something against their will and what they would like to do, but there is also a balance to get also on the fact that there's to a certain extent uneducated on a certain things, where awareness of a certain number of things they need to be told also about that. Not fishing in the coral there, but fishing a little bit on the blue will be much better for them on the long term by preserving. Even they used to fish in the coral, and they used to do that with their own woman, for instance, because the woman doesn't want to go in the big blue because they're afraid of the sea, etc. So you have to take into account that, but they need also to understand that if they continue to destroy what is in front of their door, there will be a limitation for them to feed their families. So I think it's an important. That's why we need to work big project. We need to delegate after that with people on the ground. And you need to be told, and you need to be incubated, and you need this incubation that I mentioned before is critical.
Thanks, Pierre. I'm gonna just we're out of time. This has been really a fantastic set of ideas and discussion. Maybe you could, each of you just could summarize your thoughts with 1 or 2 sentences to bring it all home. Where's the future of Finance for Nature going?
Well, playing off of your question, I would say the future is if folks like ourselves, development finance institutions, banks, large international conservation organization, go to place and listen and engage with the people who are there, the indigenous people, the local communities, the small scale producers, we will have a much greater chance of getting this right.
Well, I hope for a strong global biodiversity framework next year, which will set clear guidelines and will be a big push for the whole sector, for all the areas that we touched upon today. And if it were not as strong as most of us might hope, I think regulation will play a part, and I hope that there will be independent sectors that move forward, like the finance sector or the central banks or companies that see the importance of the sector.
Yeah, I think on top of the framework that we need, so that's important to create a framework and platform. First of all, collaboration. So we need to continue collaboration and partnership. The value will come from there. Try to think more about reallocation of capital. So each time we reuse capital is to think about the reallocation of capital to the right purpose. The use of data will be extremely important. And keep in mind that we go to the dematerialization of finance soon, with many new technology coming on blockchain, etc. A new type of ledger that will come, a change of accounting and monetization of the externalities that will probably transform finance. So, so there will be a lot of technical transformation in finance coming too that may be used appropriately, because technology is always the same things. You can use it on the proper way, on the improper way. So it's like finance. So if it's proper way, can ease the way that we can redirect and measure the impact on biodiversity and its monetization. So.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank a great panel and thank a great audience for listening and questions. And yeah. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, really great.
Yeah,
So thanks for following up next week with our comments.
Very good. Thanks so much. Yeah.
We'll have to be in touch.
The AFD. Yes. We still on.